Support comes from Arrow Video's Lies and Deceit, 5 films by Claude Chabrol, 5 freshly remastered films from the godfather of the French New Wave, and a beautiful box set overflowing with commentaries, new and archival interviews, visual essays, an 80-page booklet, and much more. This inaugural Arrow Video collection of Chabrol on Blu-ray brings together a wealth of passionate contributors and extras to shed fresh light on the films and the filmmaker. Dark, witty, ruthless, mischievous. If you've never seen Chabrol before, you're in for a treat. If you have, they've never looked better. Shop at arrowvideo.com.
Some people just work perfectly fine. They have no malfunctions. And for them, it's harder to actually have a character because the character is very defined by our weaknesses. But it can also be a great weakness to not have weaknesses on the surface and to suffer from that, you know. But I think to find a crack in the surface is really worth it, because that's where someone might be able to penetrate your universe. That's maybe the place where the exchange can take place.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Franz Rogowski is an actor. On the occasion of the release of his new movie, Great Freedom, he sat down with me in cyberspace to talk about the work. Is there a typical way that you like to begin your preparation process when you have a new character? Like, is there a typical first step that you take when you begin to try and wrap your arms around a new character?
I mean, obviously, in the beginning, it's more like me having open arms, waiting for the characters to fly by, you know, and I don't know when they'll come. And it's a little bit of an actor's destiny to not be an author, but to be an interpreter. Therefore, curating the offers might be one of the few things where an actor can have some kind of authorship. But other than that, I think in the beginning, you're just waiting for it to come. And then you have a script, you read the script, and if you like it, and you meet the director and you get along well, and maybe you do an audition, and you're finally sitting there with this story in your hands, and you know, okay, this is going to be interpreted by me, then you're kind of struggling, because it's just a bunch of papers and words, and it's fictional. And then on the other hand, there's you, who you have a body and you're real, and you're like wondering, okay, how am I going to close this gap between me and this fiction, between my body and this cultural product? And I think there are as many techniques to that as there are interpreters. We are all interpreting things in our daily life. I mean, yeah, we all know how it feels to say, hey, how are you doing? And it's not a real question, but we are still doing it. And I think in my case, I am, for example, in the beginning, not so much looking for my character's emotions as the emotions of an individual, and trying to be busy with, okay, how can I be deep? How can I be real? How can I be cool? But to look more at the structure of a story, how a story is created, and to come to an understanding where the emotional journey lies within the structure of a story, and also within the spaces and the actions that a character has. So it's not so much about me being, you know, this half-dried fruit that is squeezing itself until there comes the last drop, but it's more me participating as a character in situations and happenings that contain emotionality in itself. That is one approach. Another approach that I would have is to paint and create little cartoons inside the script. So I have a tendency to destroy the script. On one hand, to make paintings on the pages so that the text and the concept turns into something visual and rather physical. And by doing so, I spend time with the script, but the time is a little more, it's a little more personal, and it feels more emotional than if I just memorize the lines. And then for memorizing lines, I also have an approach that is a little bit maybe inspired by graphics or graphic novels. I would write the lines horizontally until a paper is full with the lines. And then I would turn the page 90 degrees and I would start writing those lines again. And what it creates in the end is it creates like a grid of text that is so abstract that you can't read a single word anymore. So I write the text until it becomes abstract. And when it's abstract, it is actually in my head. So I have a lot of these techniques that try to materialize the immaterial, so I can knead the dough. I can touch the word. So this, for example, are techniques I have, but there are many techniques. I mean, it's a very long, a big topic.
Well, you're making me realize, I think, or making me maybe understand why I'm so fascinated by you on the screen. I feel like what you're saying is the images on your script or the grid you're making is like moving those things up to a different plane, right? It's like moving it into a different place. It's not accessible to you in the same way. I feel like that's what's happening to me as an audience member when I'm experiencing you on the screen. It's weird. But I want to talk more technical things about this. Like when you draw those things, are you drawing something that's summing up that scene in a visual way, or it's something that's just so abstract that's just sparking you?
I guess in the preparation, I'm just trying to overcome this gap between me and fiction, and to create a common space where my experiences somehow have to do with this fictional character, and where these two worlds start to overlap, and I can use this little space that overlaps. But when it comes to acting on set, there are very technical things that I would do. For example, I don't know, you can talk to someone with your lines and look at a person, and you're open, you're like ready for a response, you're ready for a reaction. But you can also look at someone, and then when you start talking to the person, you don't look at that person anymore, because you want to make sure that you can make your point, and you don't want to be distracted by this person because the person maybe has an influence on you. Or you can actually not look at the person and first say your line. And in the very end, because you will hit that person with the last sentence that you might say, you will look at a person, but you're fully in control. And you'll just make sure that your knife actually hit the spot. And I think you don't have to change the tone of your voice. You don't have to change the lines. You just change the moment in which you open your eyes to that person. You let this other person look into you, or you look at that other person. And I think I always try to find those simple decisions that support my character's motivations. But in a preparation process, it's very subjective and very, I think a lot of actors also have to deal with the fact that they are slow learners. They want to get into the character, but it takes time. So you see them, walking in parks at night and talking to themselves. But it's actually just the lines. They're just repeating the lines, or you see them doing sports that might have to do with the character's life, or you see them losing weight and you see them gaining, and it's all trying to create some reality in your own experiences that you can use for the character.
Let's say that you figured out the proper moment to open your eyes and turn. that is most impactful in that scene, how do you then do that 5 other times without making it seem like it's totally stale now and not organic? That I don't get that.
Well, first of all, I will never know if it's the right moment. But what helps a lot is to just make a decision and to just make a decision and say, okay, I'm going to just be there with my cup of coffee, and I'm feeling the temperature of my coffee. The coffee is my friend. And I'm saying this line to that person because I do care, but I really prefer to be with my cup of coffee because it's a safe cup of coffee and very reliable. And at the very end, I will take the risk and look at that person. And then once you've done it, you've created a reality. You've created an experience, a real physical experience. And the great thing about experiencing it is that it actually creates a situation from which you can learn. So in theory, it might be a mistake, but the worst thing one can do is to try to avoid the mistake because it actually stops the learning process. So what you have to do is you just have to allow yourself to make a decision, and it might just be perfect, but it might also be the wrong decision, and you will feel it. You do it, and it feels like an old chewing gum. It feels terrible. The coffee is not your friend, and it's just esoterical bullshit. And you should just look at the person, and in the end, just throw the muck on the table. That might be the right choice. And you're right. If it works, and you have 5 more takes, it can be very challenging. Sometimes it just gets worse and worse. But when something works, I think I just follow it a little more and try to find the beauty of it and the detail. And if it doesn't, I just change my strategy so I don't fall asleep on set.
We'll be right back after this. So Arrow Video has just come out with what I think is the first Blu-ray box set of Claude Chabrol films. It's a 5-disc set called Lies and Deceit, and I'm really, really, really happy with everything about this release. First of all, Chabrol has been woefully underserved on home video, and that has led to an underappreciation of French cinema's master craftsmen here in America. I myself have a big Chabrol-sized hole in my French New Wave appreciation. Well, this set starts to fill that void. It's packed with interviews, visual essays, appreciations, introductions. There's a commentary on every single film, and there's even a select scene commentary from Chabrol himself on every film. Plus an 80-page booklet all housed in a handsome box with beautiful artwork. You can feel the appreciation when you hold this thing. Arrow Video has outdone themselves. If you've never seen Chabrol before, you're in for a treat. If you have, these films have never looked better. Lies and Deceit, 5 films by Claude Chabrol. Shop at arrowvideo.com. I think there's 2 aspects of your performance in Great Freedom that really affected me, but it only affected me. I was only able to process it later. Like I'm a very cynical moviegoer who was my cynicalness was absent in this viewing. That's why I know it was so successful. Like when I suddenly halfway through the movie realize I'm watching a movie after being cynical about movies for 40 years. That's a huge mountain you climbed with this one person right here, in my experience. So one of the aspects, though, when I thought back upon it later, was how much you were conveying without words. I don't know how you were able to do that, or if you even know what you were conveying to me without words, or is it calculated? Is it skillful? Is it just instincts? Is it just the way your face is and the way the camera picks it up? A lot of this kind of stuff has to happen in this movie. Otherwise, it's not as impactful. Can you just talk about that from your perspective of knowing what has to be conveyed and how you went about doing that?
I mean, we all have our faces that we can just use. And I think I do the same. So you have, I don't know, you have a face of compassion, you have a face of surprise, you can show that you're a harmless person. Sometimes you need to show your angry face. So we do have faces that we might also use in the scenes. But I do believe that what is maybe more interesting is the biographical material that is contained within your body. You have a life story to tell. And this life story probably never really matches a fictional character's life story, but it overlaps in terms of you're both human beings. I mean, it might be that you play a cyborg or a dragon, but when you play a human being, you can kind of count on the fact that you're both thrown into the world without being asked, and then you have to deal with certain very huge problems of being a human being. And I think accepting this pain and allowing it to vibrate will create, let's say, a human resonance within your character's shell, and will bring it to life eventually. And I think to a certain extent, it might not really have to do with you. It might just have to do with allowing yourself to surrender to a character and therefore be human in the character's actions. But on the other hand, I also think that the reason why we might look at some actors and be interested in them is because we can find ourselves in them, because they create this resonance. In my case, I think I have certain features or certain physical realities that I deal with that make me the person I am. For example, I hear 15% on my left ear, and the other 85 are gone. On the right ear, I am deaf. I hear nothing. So my world is actually very dependent on my eyes and me listening to the others on a visual level to understand what they're actually saying. And it gives my person or my persona a little bit different flavor maybe. And maybe sometimes I can use that in cinema, since I don't know, it creates a certain color. But I believe that we all have this color. We just have to find it. And some people just work perfectly fine. They have no malfunctions, and for them it's harder to actually have a character, because the character is very defined by our weaknesses. But it can also be a great weakness to not have weaknesses on the surface and to suffer from that, you know? But I think to find a crack in the surface is really worth it, because that's where someone might be able to penetrate your universe. That's maybe the place where the exchange can take place.
Yes. The other aspect was the sense of really feeling time passing within your persona. I mean, this is so important for this movie. Like, if that didn't happen, there would be many problems. You know, not just with impact on the audience, but even with following things. I mean, there's so many aspects of that. And I think Sebastian said that you guys worked on this, but I want to know how you went about doing that and how hard that was within the restrictions of actual shooting. And then, of course, adding in the restriction of having to be interrupted by COVID, which is a whole other aspect of this. But I want to know just how you internalize that, I guess.
I mean, of course, this is a collaboration, so there is a lot of makeup involved. We had an amazing makeup artist. I mean, there's an entire art form called aging that is only dealing with prosthetics and hair, and then you can create so many subtle changes by changing the physique. Also, I lost weight for the 40s, like 24 pounds, and that also gave me a lot of my body gave me a lot of emotional feedback also on the loss of weight, from sleeping less to having no more sexual drive to being very weak in many ways, but also very free, since all my anxiety and my nervousness and my being busy and stuff, all of this disappeared and turned into a Zen-like state of emptiness. And this is something I use for the 40s, since I would never try to pretend that I know how it really feels to have been in concentration camp and then being freed by the Allies, being straight, being sent to prison for being gay. I can try to create a physical pain, for example, with the diet and a state of weakness that I can use, but then I would rather focus on things like loneliness or like the relationship to the cellmate, to create something that is alive, something that turns this fiction into life. But I'm not trying to play history, embody history, or to embody a profession or a sexual orientation. I mean, for me, what I've always been playing in this movie is a physical need and then later a love story. I'm not playing that I'm gay, I'm playing that I love this man. And so, yes, physically speaking, we had these modifications with the makeup artist, and I would also do this diet, and we would start with the 60s and with the 40s. So I would, over the period of shooting, lose the weight. Then, now looking back, knowing that COVID hit, we could have created much more contrast, but back then we didn't know. So I lost the weight, and then the day we wanted to shoot the 40s, COVID hit. So I gained all the weight again, 5 months of break, and then had to lose it again. It was quite challenging. But what was beautiful about this break was all of us had gone back to their lives, experienced their things, did other projects. But then when we came back, we felt the spirit immediately that we felt like we believe in this project, and we've already established a common ground, and we are already two-thirds through the process of shooting, and it took us maybe half a day to be back in the zone. And it gave the 40s also a particular energy to have had this huge break, which normally never happens in cinema, that you just make a break for 5 months and then start shooting again. So this was also a physical reality that I think helped us. And on a more conceptual level, I think this person in the 40s is broken by the system to a degree where he turns into space. He becomes a bat. He sits in bed, but he becomes the bat. He sits in a door frame. He becomes part of the architecture, or he's just standing in his own gravity line. That was very specific about the 40s. In the 50s, we see a rebel. So a rebel, for example, is someone that is, in my interpretation, was someone who is not standing in his own gravity line, but is constantly going further. He wants to go beyond those walls. He's not accepting reality, but lives in dreams or in concepts of freedom that are not there yet. So someone fighting the now to a certain extent. The 60s, this person's coming back to the here and now, but not through fighting or through being broken, but actually he's surrendering to the structural violence he's surrounded by, and therefore arriving in the place that he is living in, which sometimes is prison in his case, and he's paying the price for living the life he wants to live,
Yeah.
but he's not anymore in crisis with the system, like, or being broken or being in his dreams, but he's kind of has arrived in the here and now of a structural violence in Germany in the 60s. And this is the absurdity of Hans' personal freedom, that the freedom he lives in is actually a freedom of surrendering. It's not a freedom of fighting and breaking free. It's actually the freedom of acceptance.
It's so interesting what you just said, because I have a quote from a director you just worked with. I reached out to him, Ira Sachs. I just wanted to ask him about you, and here's what he said. Franz is really one of the most interesting actors I've ever collaborated with, and it was particularly wonderful to talk to him about acting. We talked at length about performances that inspired us: James Cagney, Jenna Rollins, Gerard Depardieu, and I found his insights and analysis continually both fascinating and meaningful. He's an animal. His acting is deeply instinctual, and yet he brings an intellectual curiosity to his method, which is equally impactful. It's a conversation and collaboration that I deeply loved and was inspired by. So it's interesting to read that and then to talk to you, because what you just said and the interesting intellectual way you have to size up the different phases of Hans's life on the screen for us in those different time frames. But the way that you were able to embody those intellectual aspects seemed totally instinctual. That's what I don't understand. I don't get how you can, and you're laughing, I don't understand how you can understand this in the way you do, and yet perform it in a way like, and this is a real compliment, like some of our great non-actors who we just capture, but you're able to explain it intellectually and yet act it instinctually. Can you talk about that?
That's great. If that sometimes takes place, that's really cool. I mean, I think we have different centers in our body, and we can, when we train it a little bit, we can play on different scales, and one can analyze a script and talk about dramaturgy and the construction of a character to get closer to a character. But then in the very end, when you're in front of the camera, you might need very different techniques. Maybe you have to deal with your body weight, and you just need to move your body weight a bit forward to the tips of your toes, so you actually on the verge of falling, and it will give your character another transparency. And sometimes you just have to realize, okay, oh my God, I'm not listening to my colleague here. There's another actor telling me things through his character, and I'm not listening. So I just really need to listen. And in other moments, it's sometimes totally fine to see this reality of having one line to say. There's nothing complicated about it, and you don't have to do anything special. And then it's really just about focusing on your breathing, that your breathing is normal, and that you can just say your line, and in the echo of your line, in the silence following your sentence, not to interpret what you've just done, but to just let it be. Of course, that's also an art form, to let things be, and it's not always easy to achieve that. But the great thing is that we do sometimes 20, 30 takes, and then what you see is the one take where it worked.
Yeah. Franz Rogowski, I don't know if you can tell, I need like 3 hours with you. I hope we can do this again.
Oh, that would be great.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of The Gotham, formerly IFP. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.